Welcome to In Focus. I'm your host, Dolores Alvarez. Today we have, according to the New York Times, someone hilarious, superb, clearly a major talent. Josh Grisetti is the head of the musical theater department here at CSUF and has worked on various roles on Broadway, film, and will soon be featured in the upcoming season of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, airing on Amazon Prime this April. An actor, director, author, now educator. Without further ado, Josh Grisetti, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I feel like anytime I'm ever introduced, they should read the New York Times reviews of my work. It really elevates the situation, so I appreciate it.
And very much fitting, very much fitting. Thank you so much for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit about your time on Broadway?
I mean, there's a lot to say there. The long and short of it is, it's one of the best times of my life. I mean, all of us who dream of being actors, like Broadway is such a part of that dream. So to see that manifest and to be part of so many incredible productions over the years and work with so many incredible people and make some of the best friends of my life, it's a really special thing that I, will always hold very dear. So it's a highlight of the last 40 years.
That's awesome, and you've clearly been successful in your work, and you even coach and offer master classes. But did you have a mentor throughout these times, and what did they teach you?
I didn't have a specific mentor, but in a way, all of these amazing people that you work with become your mentors, and I pretty quickly aligned myself when I first hit the New York scene with sort of the legacy theater folks. So I was working with people like Joseph Stein, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof and Rags and other major shows, and Carl Reiner and Neil Simon. All of those three actually worked in the early days of television, sort of crafted sketch comedy and television sitcoms. So to work with them, and then people like Hal Prince, who's a famous theater director and producer, who they're now discussing whether they should name a Broadway theater after him. They're targeting one of the theaters that does not have a name currently to be named after him. Hal was a major supporter of mine in the early years, saw one of the first big shows I did in New York and took me under his wing for years, kept trying to put me into different projects and things, and we eventually did one together called The Prince of Broadway, which is a review of his work that we did in Japan, and then it eventually moved to New York. Susan Stroman was also working on that show. Jason Robert Brown was on that. Then working with Casey Nicholaw. These are all a bunch of names that if you're theater people, you're recognizing right now. And if you're not, you're like, who? But in that world, these are really icons. Like I always joke, if I wrote a memoir of my theater career, it would have some title about walking with the giants, walking with the legends, because these people are just that. And so to watch them work and to learn from them, and in fact, Hal Prince wrote one of my recommendation letters to my grad program that I eventually did. So he was supportive even of the educational side of my career, which obviously has taken off. But he always said for himself, had he not become a theater director and producer, he would have gone into education. So there is something about that that's really gratifying, that was in the fabric of some of these icons' lives as much as it is a part of the fabric of mine.
Perfect, and that's actually leading into my next question. What are some essentials that you recommend to people who are getting into musical theater as an art form or as a career?
I would say essential number one is figure out who you are, rather than focusing on the people that you admire and the people you want to be like. I feel like a lot of young performers are so interested in replicating what they've seen before that it takes a long time to get them to look inward and be like, oh, what do I want to say? What do I want to do with a role? how do I want to be viewed in this landscape or in this story or in this character? I feel like that is such a healthier place to start, and that's the stuff that makes really unique, dynamic performers that eventually go on to have really prosperous careers. Is people who are kind of marching to the beat of their own drum. And I think we all start admiring others and mimicking others. I mean, that is a part of the rite of passage, I guess. But I think the sooner you can move forward from that and start asking some harder questions that are self-reflective, I think that's where the real magic sort of starts to happen.
Wonderful. And can you tell me a little bit more about your background and where you're from? I know you're from the East Coast, so what made you want to get into teaching in the West or here at Cal State specifically?
Yeah, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in Virginia. And then I went to North Carolina School of the Arts for high school. So my high school diploma is in drama. And then I went to Boston Conservatory for college and got a BFA in musical theater, very similar to the BFA we offer here. And from there I moved straight to New York, and I was in New York for almost 20 years, doing theater, TV, film, commercial, whatever I could get my hands on. And I always wanted to teach. I knew that from an early age, even while I was still in college. I was like, one day, like, teaching I think is going to be of interest to me. I just never knew when it would be, and I wanted to be the professor whenever I got there who had a resume behind him who could say, look, this is, the things I'm teaching you, here's how I put them into practice. Not to say that the only way to become a teacher of theater is to go through the industry. I think there are other ways, but that was the path I knew I wanted to employ. So I was always on the hunt for an MFA program, knowing that one day I would want to teach, and I only had interest in higher ed. I never really had an interest in teaching below that level. And part of that is just because the mechanics of teaching acting. I think it takes a certain level of maturity to even grasp some of those ideas. Otherwise, you're just teaching people how to speak louder and clearer and stuff like that, and that's just not my wheelhouse. I'm much more interested in the sort of spiritual and intellectual journey of performance. So I was kind of dancing around this idea of getting an MFA for a long time and never pulled the trigger, because the one time I did, the professors I was speaking to said, you're still working in the industry. When you're ready to teach, stop doing the industry stuff, go get an MFA, and then walk straight into academia. Like with your resume now, that should be a pretty simple journey. So you don't need to stop what you're doing now when you're in the height of your career. So I took that advice and listened to it. And it wasn't until I was on a national tour. I'd done a Broadway show that then went on tour that took me out to the West Coast. And I knew in advance what the itinerary was, and I saw LA. Oh, we're going to end this tour in LA. That's fantastic. I think I'm just going to box up my apartment in New York, send it all out to Los Angeles now. And then I did that, and then it all sat in a storage unit while I was on tour. And as soon as the tour ended, I unpacked the boxes, put them into a new place on the West Coast, and hit the town, running here in Los Angeles, mainly with the intent to do mostly TV and film. And then right after that, I did a pilot for NBC and a commercial. But then right after that, the pandemic hit. And I was like, well, the whole industry is shut down, and I just moved here specifically to hammer down on the industry on the West Coast. And so I took that time and I got my MFA. I was like, I'll knock this out while the industry is shut down because there's nothing else to do. And I really wasn't planning to go into academia right away. I just wanted to have it done so that when the opportunity presented itself, I'd be ready. Well, the opportunity presented itself right here in Fullerton, which was my backyard at that point. And it was a really amazing opportunity to come. They were hungry for change. They knew they had this legacy BFA musical theater program that needed to be renovated and updated for the 21st century. And so they were looking for somebody to do that. And it just sort of, the stars sort of aligned. And it was like, well, if the universe is opening that door right here, right now, I think I should take it. So I did, and they've been very generous in allowing me to continue to work outside of the campus as well. And so it's been a really prosperous, exciting time.
That's wonderful. That's amazing to hear. Everything has definitely aligned. I know how that goes.
Yeah.
It feels like it's the perfect time. right? And tell me a little bit more, what are some of the changes being made here to the Legacy musical theater program at CSUF, and how do you think it's evolved since your involvement?
It's evolved very rapidly, and part of that was it was just a tinderbox waiting for someone to strike the match. They hired myself and Professor Marty Austin Lamar, who was formerly running the musical theater program at Howard University. They hired us together to come in and do this work, and because of that, a lot of the times you come into academia and I think there's this feeling like, oh, the new professors are always, trying to make change happen, and it's a slow, gradual process, which makes a lot of sense. But here, for the musical theater BFA, they really knew that they wanted people to come in and make the changes. So everybody was so supportive of that. The administration, the other faculty, they were just rooting it on from the get-go. And the students, I think, they were equally ready for it. So we had a lot of license to make a lot of drastic changes very quickly. One of the most obvious ones is previously it was a 2-year BFA concentration. Now it is fleshed out into a full 4-year BFA program, which is really critical because that's what everyone who you'll be competing with on the outside who got a BFA in musical theater, they're going to have had 4 solid years of training that is very specific, basically vocational training for the performance side of musical theater industry. So we came in and did that, which meant finding new spaces to teach in, hiring new faculty, and getting rid of what's called a cut program. I don't know if that's a familiar phrase to you, but theater folks will know. Yeah, so what that is it's the way that all of the major musical theater programs began, which is you bring in a certain group of students in the freshman year, and at about the halfway point of the training, usually at the end of the sophomore year, you have to re-audition for the program, which means some people get cut from it. And they have to then go on and decide what else they want to do because they spent 2 years at what they used to call them here at Cal State was musical theater hopefuls. So they were hoping to get a musical theater degree, but exactly, and that response you just had is the real reason why over time every major musical theater program got rid of that model. It turns out there's pros and cons to it, but the con it far outweighs the pro, which is that it really wrecks people's emotional lives. It wrecks people's social lives. A lot of actors, for better or worse, put a lot of their identity in the fact that they are performers, that is what they do with their lives. And so to get 2 years into that, in this very developmental stage that everyone's in the college years, and then have that rug pulled out from under them is just very, very traumatizing. And so it was the first thing that we got rid of. To a lot of fanfare, I can't tell you the number of high school theater directors and choir directors and so on, and even community college professors who have written into us to say, we just heard that Cal State no longer has this cut program and we are so excited. We have not really been encouraging our students to apply because we didn't want them to have to risk that. And I totally get that, so I can't blame them. But because of that, we've seen over the last year alone, about 160% increase in applications to the BFAs, which is really exciting to show us that, okay, we are definitely on the right track. We had this instinct and it's proving to be right. But the other fun thing is that we've now stretched out acting, singing, and dancing across every semester, all 8 semesters, all 4 years, including private voice, dance or movement classes, acting classes. We fleshed all of that out so that everybody's getting it every day that they're in classes, which is important because it's really hard to teach 3 art forms in 4 years, And lastly, I'd say the big thing is just modernizing the program and putting a much stronger emphasis on acting for the camera, which is now the entirety of the 4th year acting curriculum for the musical theater students, which is rare for any BFA, but us being so close to Los Angeles, I feel like is a really pivotal thing to make sure that the students understand how to do. That also means they get demo footage, and that leads us to the digital age where most agents don't want to come see a college showcase anymore. They want to sit at their desk and have digital content come to them. And so we've made really strong efforts to provide acting reels, singing reels, and dance reels for our dancers, so that they have all that digital content to go out with. So although we continue to do our senior showcase both in New York and Los Angeles, we also have all this digital footage that we can send out so that those agents who are not interested in coming in person can see all of that and still have access to the students and help build a bridge from Cal State to the industry.
Yes, exactly. And speaking of the seniors and the digital footage and content that they get to take with them, can you describe the 54 Below showcase that the theater department holds for its BFA musical theater seniors? And what is it like to prep students for a concert of that magnitude?
Yeah, I think first of all, we try to get them away from feeling like it is a concert of such magnitude because that sort of framework can lead to a lot of anxiety, and there's going to be plenty of anxiety anyway because this is like this is your debut performance in New York City, and 54 Below, if you're not aware, is one of the premier cabaret venues for Broadway folks. So that's where Tony Award winners are going to do their cabaret acts. It's where a lot of Broadway folks, on their off nights, they'll do the Monday night shows and do concerts there in groups. So it's a very high-end place that has a lot of connotation for the industry. And so putting our students there, for the agents who come in, they're used to seeing their clients on that stage or their favorite Broadway performers. So to see our students performing there, it says something, about the caliber that we see our students being. And of course, we also have a videographer come and film that whole event, so the agents who cannot be there in person or just have no interest in going to an in-person showcase, they'll have that footage that they can then add to their digital portfolios. And now it has the 54 Below branding in the background that is so familiar to people. If you've been watching musical theater TikToks, you're going to be seeing a lot of 54 Below footage. So now our students will have that. So first of all, with all of that natural height built in, we want to take the edge off of that and say, this is just a casual night like any other. Like, it feels heightened, but the reality is the nervousness does not increase. We have a threshold of how much adrenaline will pump through our bodies and how much nervousness, that nervous energy we'll have. And it's the same performing on the main stage here at Cal State or a regional theater here in Los Angeles or 54 Below or Broadway. But the more we hype it up, I think the more treacherous that slope becomes for the psyche. So we want to unwind that and just say, listen, go out there and do your best work. Go out there and do this because it's so fun and that you're going to be able to do this. Not everybody gets to perform at 54 Below. How exciting is that? So, and contextualizing it not as fear or anxiety or nerves, but contextualizing it as excitement. It's thrilling to do this. So let the butterflies be there, embrace them, but go out there and do it because you love it. That's what's going to make you shine. That's what's going to make people so attracted to you as a performer, is to see that light that can't really be replicated any other way than sheer joy. So that's, I think, the main thing. Otherwise, we do the same work that we do in any other class. Just do you understand what the character's talking about, singing about? And if so, great, play that. And the rest will all come out in the wash. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And over the last decade, our media consumption has increased vastly in streaming platforms and home viewing. And how do you see the transition of streaming affecting live musicals?
I love this question because everyone's terrified of this question in the industry. And I work. I work with leadership with one of the unions called Actors Equity Association, which is the stage actors union, which is separate from SAG-AFTRA, which is the Screen Actors Union. I'm going to say this radical now. People don't panic. I think they should all be one union. They have historically been very separate, but as this question illustrates, these worlds are colliding. And we had a major collision during the pandemic because suddenly the only way to do theater was remotely. And that meant you needed a camera. And once a camera got involved, SAG-AFTRA came and said, whoa, you're now in our jurisdiction. Once a camera is involved and you're streaming this stuff, you're no longer doing theater, you're doing film. and now the theater union and the film union had this clash. And I think that was the warning shot for us all to be like, okay, we need to know this is going to continue. We are not going to keep separating these two. We're going to keep merging them. So I think the whole industry is on the verge of a sort of radical new thing, and we're probably still 10, 15 years away from it. But I think it's inevitable. And I think it's also inevitable with the costs of theater production getting so high and the expectation of the audience getting so high that the cost of doing it, I don't know that there's going to be a way to continue doing it without a digital component where you can, I think it'll be relative to the movie industry when VHS was first introduced, and people said, you can't let people watch movies at home. They'll never go to the theater again, which has turned out to be completely untrue. It's a totally different experience to watch a movie in a theater versus watching it on your couch. And I think that same thing would ring true if and when we make the leap and start streaming live theater regularly. I don't know what the mechanics of that will look like, because I think the unions are going to have a lot to say, and I think a lot of performers and creatives are going to have a lot to say. But eventually I think it's inevitable. That's the bottom line.
I think so too. It adds to the list of many things that have changed after the pandemic, including, healthcare, school, education, musical theater, film, everything. Everything has definitely changed. And we're going to take a little more personal turn now. And you published a memoir titled God in My Head. And it's a really vivid personal story. How did this experience affect you? And could you elaborate a little more for the audience on that?
Yes.
On the story.
I know it's such a big question, because we could do a whole interview just on this topic. So I'll try to get this as condensed as possible. I'll start with the last question, which is just expanding on what this is for the sake of people watching this. It has nothing to do with theater. It has nothing to do with teaching. It's a completely separate thing. And really, I had this sort of radical experience in my 20s where it was born out of a pretty severe dental phobia from some traumatizing events that happened as a child, all of which is chronicled in the book just to set up what happened and why. But it ended up resulting in me essentially self-medicating to try to avoid the trauma of the past in relation to this dental work that I had to have done, which was relatively minor and should not have done that. But a phobia by nature is an irrational fear. So I acknowledge that now in hindsight. I couldn't quite articulate it at the time what I was doing or why. But I ended up essentially overdosing on prescription drugs to the point that my heart rate dropped really low, my blood oxygen level bottomed out. And I ended up essentially having some really incredibly intense hallucinations in a dentist's office, which sounds absurd, and it is. And in this hallucination, as the title suggests, I met God, the almighty creator of the universe, through a very specific lens, which I also acknowledge in the book. I grew up very conservative Christian in the mountains of Virginia, as you can imagine. There's a very specific subculture. It was a Southern Baptist subculture that I was in, and I'd fallen away from it for years. I had been away from that and had really become sort of an angry agnostic, I guess. And then, lo and behold, I have this vision, this hallucination where I meet God, the thing that I questioned even exists at all. And that was a major moment for me, because to me, as much as it was in my head, as the title suggests, I titled it trying to get away from, what it ended up, trying to get away from scaring anybody off like this crazy person. I acknowledge it was in my head, but like Dumbledore tells Harry Potter at the end of the book, spoiler alert, yes, it's all in your head. Does that make it any less real? And so for me, it had profound impact on me. It changed how I viewed the universe. It changed how I viewed the meaning of life in my function in it all, which is pretty crazy. But I felt it was just for me. I never intended to write a book about it or talk. I talked to people individually if it came up, but I really felt like it was a personal experience. And then a family friend, a friend of my parents really, who was in that subculture of the church in Virginia, sent me this book called Heaven is for Real. And it was a very popular book at a certain point, and it was about a child who had a very similar sort of experience. He was under anesthesia. His heart never stopped. His lungs never stopped breathing. But he was out, under medications, and had this massive hallucination where he saw heaven. And lo and behold, his father was a Christian minister, and his father wrote the book for him, but because he was only like 6 years old or something. And the book was basically used as proof of, see, my son had this hallucination or this vision, and it proves everything we believe about the afterlife and about God and whatever. And really used it to evangelize. And it struck me so false, because I was like, well, I've had an experience like that, but I didn't use it to try to evangelize that everybody should believe what I saw. And so I wrote the book sort of as a counterpoint example to that type of thinking, as a counterpoint to say, just because I saw these things, which were so real to me, like I cannot diminish that. They were very real to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's meant for everyone. My truth may be very different than your truth, and how you relate to the idea of God, whether you even use that name or not, is such a personal experience, and your relationship with the universe is such a personal experience that I would not use mine to dictate yours. And so that's what the book really is about. So it's pretty heavy stuff, but also I am generally not the heaviest of thinkers and speakers. Like, I'm a very casual professor, which I dress like this on purpose. I tell my students, I'm like, listen, I'm gonna dress like this so that you don't mistake me for just the dude who's in front of you talking all the time, because I am casual in my demeanor enough that line can often get very blurry. So I try to establish like some boundaries around that. So the book, although it's as you talk about it in a nutshell version, sounds very intense, it is also very sort of goofy and casually written. It's meant for the layman. It's not like a highbrow theological discussion. So it's a pretty quick, fun read for those who want to embark on it, but it is a specific journey.
Perfect. Yes, I'm definitely going to read the whole thing. Yeah, because read a little bit of it. And can we bring it back now to CSUF and our work here? What you've been a part of plenty of film and theater productions, and what are some of the biggest differences between those work environments?
Between theater and film and television?
I would say between film and theater, excuse me.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest difference is the stamina required. And that's what I mean by that is, in theater, once the train starts moving at 8 o'clock when the curtain goes up, the train is moving with you or without you. So, the stamina required of just keeping that energy going for 2.5 hours and hitting all your marks and whatnot the right ways, or right is probably the wrong way to contextualize that, but in ways that feel creatively fulfilling to you and tell the story. That's just much more intense than, to me, than doing film and television, where oftentimes you're going to do fragments of scenes at a time. It's rare, it's possible, but it's rare that you do a long stretch of scene work all at once before you need to reset cameras and whatnot. And then this is why I stumble on the word stamina, because in a weird way, film and TV asks a different type of stamina, the stamina of focus, because instead of doing a show for 2.5 hours, you're going to slowly pick apart a scene bit by bit, beat by beat, for hours. So you may be doing the same words literally all day, for 12 hours, or worse, 16 hours or something. And so that can become its own challenge. But ultimately, the levity of it is provided in the fact that when you make a mistake in film and TV, you just go, oh, that wasn't right. Let's reset and do another take. You don't get another take in film or in theater, so you're just out there doing it. If something goes wrong, you wing it until you get it to go right again. And that's just a different thing. So I'd say that is the most obvious, and as an actor, the most pressing difference between the two.
Definitely, especially more as an actor in a business where feedback on your work is publicized and helps determine what direction your career goes. How do you stay grounded in the middle of all the noise?
There's a lot of ways to answer that question. One is the obvious one: don't read the feedback. Let your agency or whoever, your team of people, let them do the research on how people are perceiving your career. Because I think there is a danger to you trying to view yourself in your own work through the eyes of everyone else. And not even the eyes of everyone else, through the eyes of theatrical critics or some people online who are, either hyper enthusiastic or trolling you, which you're going to get both. And that's the crazy neurosis of all of us. I would say it's for actors, but I really think it's all of us. You will forget the 20 people who said, "Oh my God, that was an amazing performance." But you'll always remember the one who's like, "I don't know, it doesn't seem like your voice was really suited for that role." That's the one that you're always going to be haunted by. We remember the negative feedback more than we ever remember the positive. So that's the danger of reading them, is that you're always going to skew to the stuff that you think you need to fix. And some of that might be honest, but some of it might be totally off base. Like somebody has some position on your voice or on your look or on whatever that is so arbitrary and superficial and silly that there's no reason to concern yourself with it too much. And again, I say leave it to your representatives, because when it comes to how it's going to guide your career, people see you in a certain light. Once they see you and celebrate you in one light, they're going to want you to stay in that light forever. It's like, oh, for me, I'll use myself as an example. You're the funny, young, nerdy, quirky guy, who sings well. Like, great, that's what you'll do. So no one is now looking and being like, yeah, but can he do dramatic work? Could he be in a Shakespeare? Could he, no one's looking at that. They're only looking at the similar projects to what you just did. And you can reinvent yourself by doing something completely different and shocking everyone and making them go, oh my God, there's a whole other side of this performer. But that takes some effort. But most of that does harken back to the critical praise that you get from one project. Once that blows up, it can shape your career. And whether you want to fight that or lean into it, both are totally viable options, and different artists have different opinions on what should be done at that point. But letting your agents kind of be a part of that conversation, letting your team help you decide what route you want to take next, whether you want to expand or whether you want to double down, that's all sort of between you and them. But I'd say take it all with a grain of salt and ultimately follow your own instincts, because you won't be happy if you do anything else. So let your own instincts be your guide on that.
Wonderful, wonderful. This wraps up our questions, and it was wonderful talking with you today. We want to thank you, Professor Josh Grisetti, for sharing your journey and your chronicles. Good luck on your future endeavors. Until next time, I'm Dolores Alvarez. This has been In Focus.